Hey guys, this is Auqium here, and I apologize for any background noise I might have, as I always have some, but I wanted to give you a tracking tutorial on temp tracking and layering and the issues I have with it. First off, a lot of people don't really understand how temp tracking works and how useful it really is. They believe that narrowing to the 25 by 25 area is the best way to track, and it really isn't. And I don't know why people haven't figured this out for themselves yet, but tracking somebody to the 25 takes a much longer time than tracking them to an area of, like, let's say 250. The exact same thing is true for tracking somebody to a 1K by 1K area is much faster than tracking somebody to a 250 by 250 area. So the smaller and smaller you go, the harder and harder it is to narrow somebody. However, when you begin to hit really small numbers, well, not too small, but small numbers such as like 250, or 125, or maybe even 500 or 400s, you're able to temp track and really do good with tracking. What you basically do is set up a temp tracker to narrow the remaining coordinates that you need for your track. And instead of moving the actual diamond block in your tracker and wasting time at your tracker, you can actually build trackers that are specialized only for temp tracking and will allow you to get amazing rates every single time. Be not really X-rayable. You won't be spending too much time at them. They're practically unrateable. And they're just honestly the best. You really can't beat them. And anybody who thinks they can track my trackers and narrow to the 25 and not temp track them, even if you temp track my trackers, I'd be surprised. That's really hard to do. It's just really not possible for anybody who is not extremely good. Like, extremely good. Not cocky people who think they're good, but you have to be really damn good to get my trackers. Even me tracking myself, trying to use my trackers, would be very confusing. I wouldn't be able to get somebody who was like me. So let's explain how temp tracking works using this small little stacked tracker. Now this one will have a range of 300, this one will have a range of 200, and this one will have a range of 100. Now if I were to track him here, and he was on it, and then track him here, and he was on it, and then track him here, and he was not on it, you would go back to here, get the coordinates. So right now I'm at 2050x, and this thing goes 200 blocks, so I would add 200 to 2050 and get 2250. But that's wrong. When you temp track, you don't want to do that. But actually you can do that, but it just takes more steps. What you actually want to be doing is adding, not necessarily adding, subtracting half of your narrow. So my narrow is 100 because it goes down 300, 200, 100. So I'm going to subtract half of that, 50, from the coordinates that I got, and that would be 2250 minus 50 equals 2200. Also, instead of just saying this is 200, I could simply add 150 instead of 200. Inversely, I could also do 50 here, I could do 250 here, 150, 50. And that allows you to go to the center of a box. Now here is what a design for a temp tracker would be, to cover an area. Now let's assume that each stone block represents 50 blocks in game. So this would be a 250 by 250 block area, or a 5 by 5 here. And we'd put a tracker in this location to track each part of it. Now if you go back to building normal trackers, it's always better to build a tracker that's at the center of something, like this, rather than something like this. Actually, whoops. So it's much better to do something like this rather than this. And why? Is because you'll have a better narrow, although you'll be tracking two ways, which isn't an issue with temp tracking. It's not like it's going to be bad for you. Doing that, actually, throughout tracking is always going to be better for you. So instead of doing this, we actually want to create something that will track the exact same area, and use actually a little bit less resources. Well, actually, you'll use more gold because you're making a horizontal, but you'll actually be getting a better narrow. So this right here has a narrow of 50, while something like this would have 1, 2, 3, 4, a narrow of 100. So this thing had half the narrow of that. In the real game, if we were to have a 250 by 250 box, we would have a 250 narrow, while here we actually only have 125 narrow in game. Which is very, very useful. Now, because when temp tracking, you actually always want to overshoot the area that you're tracking, and give yourself kind of like a barrier, not necessarily a barrier, but a buff, something that you can reach outside of and not have an issue. And I'll represent that area that we can reach outside of with light gray wool. So this is kind of the area that is a just in case that he's in here. You can track this because your tracker does hit it. Now, the actual area that we want to be tracking is a 250 by 250 area, but what we are allowed to do here is give ourselves that extra little bit that we can track. So even if we screw up the track, somehow you are a terrible tracker and you screw it up, you always have the safety barrier and you can still temp track him. I've been encountering a lot of issues with specific trackers, and if you're not using my tracker design or layered trackers that are precisely on top of each other and no staggered diamond blocks whatsoever, you're going to have an issue where you might sometimes get a guy who is one block off from what you should be, and that's why you need to be extending your tracker just a little bit more. So that's what temp tracking is for. Now, if we accept the fact that tracking somebody to a 250 block area is better than tracking somebody to 25 by 25, you have to think of how fast you'll be able to track people. Now, if somebody wants to warp to their vault, they'll be warping in and out very, very quickly. Extremely quick. Maybe just a few seconds they'll spend there. And what's really useful about temp trackers is that you don't have to narrow to 25. You're not pressured to do that. You can track somebody to a larger area, like for instance you could do this, track to that, and then build a tracker exactly where these little red bars are right here, and build a tracker that encompasses that area. I'm pointing at my screen like you guys can see it, but you obviously can't. But it's a lot easier to do that than to actually narrow to the exact coordinate, because I mean, I'd literally be looking at a pixel on one of these blocks is where I need to be, rather than me just actually building a tracker that encompasses all these pixels and can narrow to that very, very quickly. So what I'd like to do is show you how to build a really nice temp tracker. It's actually the perfect design. You can do other things if it doesn't bug you as much. For instance, some people don't like offsetting this. Some people don't even like putting the dirt under it. But the essentials to the tracker is going to be the vanilla on top, the actual temp tracker, kind of the bulk of it, or the body, and then the final check part of the temp tracker. Now what you're going to need for a temp tracker is as follows: stone, obsidian, cobblestone, gold blocks, and diamond blocks. Now depending on how big your narrow is, or how big of a box you're making, for a 250 block by 250 block area, you're actually going to be making something like this. So let's float this up one off the ground. So you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, I'm going to need some dirt as well, if you want to be building a specific design. So let's grab some dirt, and we're going to take this first one and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in each direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And finally 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to cap that off with stone as the tip of the tracking arm, or finger, as I think it's Spotted Hippo likes to call it that. And we're then going to use that as our check. So this is the longest range, or longest arm that we're going to need. And this is actually going to represent 150 blocks in the game, as it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the final one also counts. So 6 times 25 is 150. Now if you're tracking a 250 by 250 area, and you're sitting at the center of that area, it's going to allow you to overshoot the area by 25 blocks in each direction. So that's why we have that. We're then going to take stone and place it around here. Going to take cobblestone and place it around that as well. Take some more cobblestone like that. And you're just going to continue going up until you hit the last thing of obsidian. And then finally we'll cap it off with stone as well. Now I'm going to show you what the difference would be between having the dirt there and having it staggered off to the side, and having neither of those things, or maybe just one. Now the dirt is going to be used as a platform for you to build. Initially when you built a tracker, you would build something like this, and it would go actually just one off. You'd want to place cobblestone or dirt here. I'll represent that with dirt, as our dirt is a platform block. So let's put dirt on the tips of these. And our gold blocks would actually go here. Now if you're extremely rich on obby like I am, since I have a really nice obby gen, I don't even have to do anything. I just place redstone and it magically comes into my chest. Thank you, Wither. If you actually have a ton of obby like I do, you don't have to worry about putting dirt under the obsidian. Now, even though I have tons of obby, I don't like wasting it. I'm really not like that. So what I like to do is not only put gold under here, but I actually like putting dirt all along this area. So what you can do is do this, and then you directly jump down and do track all on these, or actually not track all, but track the specific player name, and it would break down your tracker, and this would be the final check to see if he's still in the area, so that he didn't just warp off of it at random. So when you're done doing this, the entire cobblestone and stone structure will be gone, and your vanilla will be floating in space, and you usually don't like that. So what people would then do would be to mine it up, but you're mining up a floating vanilla. And that's not fun, because all your blocks will drop to the ground. So something that you can do is instead place an entire layer of dirt above the vanilla. I'm sorry, not above the vanilla. Above the thingamajigger. What am I even saying? Above the temp tracker. There we go. Sure. So you're going to take dirt all around this. You're going to extend it just out one passage so it kind of looks like a staircase. And let me go grab some tracking blocks real quick, because I'm too lazy to grab these. There we go. And you can then build your tracker, yes, right on top of this. Alright, so there you have it. Once that cobblestone and stone thing break down, you'll then have a floating tracker that's standing on dirt. So once you break this down, you now have a nice steady platform for you to break down this area, and then you just leave behind the dirt. And dirt isn't valuable to anybody, except for if you're playing Hunger Games and you're a worm. Then enjoy the regen. But an issue that you have with this is that you have to break the diamond block just to go down on it, then the dirt block. Alternatively, you can leave just the diamond block and then jump down directly onto it. But a better fix for this is, let me world edit this because I don't want to actually have to move it, so that'll be a complete pain. A better fix to doing this would be to actually take this out here and slide it over by one block. So let's copy it. So / copy. Oh, / expand 1U, no, D, / copy. And then let's move over here, set to 0. My mom is in pain. And paste it here. I have no idea what... Oh, it's all messed up. There we go. So now it's been slid over by one. The dirt is still under the obsidian. And you no longer actually have to place... you can actually keep the dirt here as well. You no longer have to break the diamond block. And you have the perfect temp tracker. Now, the way you would use it is you would sit up here, doing track all. And once he warped in, you would then track his name, break that thing down. You'd have your check here to make sure that he was still in the area and you finish tracking him and that he did not warp out. And then you could warp back up here, begin mining this thing up, and you're done. So after that, you just have this little skeleton of dirt left behind. And again, I apologize about all the background noise. But you just have a thing of dirt floating in the air. And it's kind of just something you can leave behind to let people know that you were there. And it's something that I quite like. Now, I'd also like to talk about some tracking methods and issues I have with narrowing using layers. Sorry, just issues I have with layers. We must accept the fact when it comes to layers that every single tracker is an individual tracker. Whether it be the one sitting on top of it or the one underneath it, they're not just one tracker. Everything's a vanilla. So we have to think of them separately. So when we think of these separately, the only difference between these two is that this one's slightly shorter and it's offset by 1. Alternatively, you could have something like this, where it's just like bam, bam. So it's about half the size and it's offset. So once we know that, we can look at layers in a different light. When you have a layer here, we can accept the fact that it doesn't track backwards. And so there's actually one block area that this thing cannot track, and that's right there. This becomes really, really terrible when you start layering your trackers to the extreme. So when you actually start layering them pretty badly, so let's go with like a 3 stack. Yeah, so when you actually start layering them, it becomes a huge area down this map that people can't track. Although it'll be minuscule, about the size of one block on, or one pixel on this little map, it's still a small area that people can hide from you. Now, if you're randomly placing your trackers, which you shouldn't be if you're actually tracking full map, and you should be planning that out and not just randomly doing things, it'll create places, for instance, that other people will put their trackers, and therefore they can hide from you. But it's not necessarily like a hiding mechanism, it's more of an annoyance. And if we go on over here, I can show you why. Now, let's look at this. This is actually a fully built one. This is when it has staggered blocks, and then over here is when I have diamond blocks placed directly next to you. And they're actually the exact same thing, except for one just has a smaller area that isn't really an issue. Again, these trackers are different from each other because of the gap, and we must accept that they can't track this area. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't track it, it just means that you can't track it efficiently. Now, an issue that I would constantly have with my trackers is that, these are very, very old trackers, like 1.5. I do track all here, and it'd be 5,000. Then I do it here, and it'd be 4,000. And so I would run up this one, and he'd still be here. And then I'd begin moving my block up, he'd still be here. So by now, I have tracked 3 times, and I've broken 1 obsidian block. I would then go to here. I've now tracked 4 times, and I've broken 2 obsidian blocks. I would then have to move it here and here, so that's another 2 obsidian blocks and another 2 times to track. And what you'd end up finding is that he's exactly right here. And what you'd also find is that it says 4,000. So you'll be tracking 4,000 blocks in that direction. Now, I haven't built the rest of the trackers, so don't really worry about that. But you might be thinking, well, I had him 4,000 here, but he wasn't on it. But the second I go all the way down here and it's 4,000, he is. And the reason why is because he was stuck somewhere in this gap or further. Now, if we accept the fact that you can't track backwards because there's nothing facing that direction, you can't track anything there. It makes you miscalculate. So what it'll force you to do is to run to the very end of your tracker, and you'll have tracked possibly like 7 times, have broken 3 or 4 obsidian, and that's already at least at a 15-second track. And if it's anything worthwhile, they're going to be long gone, and you will not be able to get their bank, or their vault, or whatever it is. So this puts you at an extreme disadvantage, especially if somebody knows how to use this against you. For instance, I know all of Zeth's tracking designs, and so I can hide from them and they will never be able to touch me efficiently. Eventually, over time, they might be able to get something, but they would have to have a lot of patience. Now, the exact same thing is shown even on a smaller scale. Even when we have the diamond blocks almost directly next to each other, there's still a 1 block gap in between the two, although it might not be apparent. There's still a gap. Same here. You have a 3 block gap here. 1, 2, 3. That cannot be tracked in on the second layer, and will thus force you to run all the way down to the end of the tracker next to the gold block. Now, I don't mean it as in that gold block, but towards the end of the area that you can track in, this little area. Because anything past this is actually really useless, as it's just not needed when you stack trackers. I hope you know that. So an issue for me is, especially when this is something that is specifically used for temp tracking, where I only narrowed to 250, is that if he's not on here, I'm actually miscalculating his coordinates by about 250 blocks. Now, if my temp tracker only tracks 150 blocks each direction, that's a fatal miscalculation. I won't be able to get him, just because he knew where to hide. Now, it just so happens that because I have 8 trackers, each tracker will have a force coordinate of either 2500 or 7500, negative or positive, whatever it is. And trackers are commonly placed on the 7500 coordinate and very rarely placed on 2500. It really depends on how people are tracking. But it'll stop me from tracking certain people's trackers, and I don't want that. So the only real way to track is to track from the exact same location repeatedly. And the only way to do that is to be forced to temp track. I would be forced to do this and step directly upwards, because then there's no gap. You're exactly on top of each other. There's absolutely no gap in your tracker, but it really stops you from actually narrowing to 25. I mean, narrowing to 25 isn't really a good thing anyways, and you should be avoiding it, but many people still do it. Not everybody likes temp tracking, and if you don't like it, and you just choose to narrow to 25, then you can put up with all the bad things that it brings with it. So, an option that you would have would be to actually mine, because it would kind of look something like this. You'd be forced to mine through 2 layers of obsidian just to track on the bottom layer, if you were to not temp track. So you'd actually have to go here and dig down like that. And this is something that Trollzor did. And it was really not useful at all. It takes forever. You're mining twice the amount of obsidian just to narrow to 25. And by the time you've done that, they've already warped out. Oh, damn it, I can't believe I did that. So it's really just inefficient, and you don't want to be doing that. So stay away from layering when it comes to things like that, and be wary of that. If somebody's not here, but they are here, and you're going to be forced to go all the way down here, sometimes you might want to just check in this location anyways, just to see if they're there. Not all the time they won't be there, but it'll definitely be a pain. So we've covered temp tracking, layering, with tracking methods. So this is a really cool thing that I liked, and especially I think you'll notice this once you start temp tracking, if you choose to do so. That when you build small trackers like this, and you sit here forever waiting for them to warp in, people you don't actually want to track are warping in. And I started to pay attention to this, and I was told not too long ago by, I think it was like iDre's team, ICE, that they were using vanillas to cover the map, and then using their full map trackers to actually track them. And they said that they wanted to understand the warping patterns of their players. And that, honest to God, is extremely inefficient. I did not like the idea. I kind of scoffed at it. Although the idea is correct, the way they chose to do it was not. What they were doing was tracking an entire quadrant at a time, instead of small areas where it could actually be useful, just to tell if somebody were in it. Now, let's say I had two bases in this quadrant. The light blue, and let's go with the pink. So I had light blue, or cyan if you will, and I had that base here, and then I had the pink one here. Now if it's a single stacked vanilla, they won't be able to tell whether I'm at this one or if I'm at that one, because it's a vanilla. You can't tell. You're not narrowing me. You're not checking if I'm somewhere else. I look the exact same to you no matter where I am on this quadrant, and it's not helpful at all except for saying, okay, he's in the quadrant. So what I wanted to do was to scale this down a bunch. I don't want to be, okay, is he in the same quadrant? Because it's very likely that somebody will be warping around in the same quadrant. But let's say I just wanted to build a tracker that would encompass a tiny little area. And let's just say this tiny little area was marked by this. So I just wanted to build a tracker that tracked this spot and this spot only. Then I didn't have to worry about all this other junk. I didn't have to worry about the entire thing. I could focus on one small location. And I could actually focus on one coordinate, while my friend, who used the full map trackers, to focus on the other coordinate. What I could do is I could make a tracker that was about this size right here, and was extremely efficient. And I could only use 2 gold blocks, and then I could switch them around at whenever I felt like it. And so I could track up and down in this direction, so this is our Z. Or I could say, alright, I'm done tracking Z, how about we start switching it up and track X? And I could then just move it over like this, and I could begin tracking X. Now this tracker specifically, if I were to put the gold blocks on it, would track 50 blocks in each direction. And tracking 50 blocks in each direction will give you a very, very, very small area that you can focus on. And so by having one coordinate, which will be seen as the X for red and the blue for Z. If I'm only tracking the X coordinate, so I only have 2 gold blocks on that thing, and I sit here, all I have to do is have my friend warp to either of these 2 trackers, or if you have 4, you can go through 4 trackers, and narrow the person to this coordinate that you're already at, because you know he's there. But the advantage of this is that you can understand their warping pattern. If you sit on the vanilla for a half hour, and you're just sitting there and you're just wondering what the heck you're doing, because it's just taking forever, you'll notice that people warp in 3 seconds or 2 seconds, or some people stay there for 5 minutes. And those are people who are AFKing. And you quickly come to realize that you can understand how long people spend at their base just by sitting there and tracking them. Now, there's absolutely no risk when it comes to using this size tracker, and then you can actually allow your friends who don't have full map warps, and you don't want to give them the warps to your full map trackers, to come and track with you and get raids with you by focusing small areas. So they can sit on this little thing that has pretty much no value at all. They can be mined up in 2 seconds. Just take the blocks, warp out, you can leave a warp there, and you can easily track people. And it's really interesting to see what people can do with this, because they'll take a block and they'll place it in a spot like 7,500. And it can be anywhere along this X coordinate, as long as it's 7,500. And then they'll have the person tracking Z hit that coordinate. Now, if you're at the 7500 coordinate and you constantly see people warping in that have really bad names, they're most likely tracking alts. And you can easily find out who's who and who to track using that. You can also just narrow them to the actual chords if you'd feel like it. So I hope you enjoyed this on temp tracking and narrowing and layering, and different tracking methods that you can use to find people's bases. Actually, lastly, I'd like to add that if you'd want to, you can raid someone's crappy base, force them to bring full op while your friends track their vaults as they get op. Or you can watch people at spawn in this little area, running outside of it with armor. Well, this is really a well-known technique. And then track them immediately afterwards to their temp bank or their PvP bank if you wait a little bit longer. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. Rate, comment, subscribe if you'd like to, and let me know how I'm doing and what you'd like to see. I'm Auqium, and I'll see you guys around.